Welcome to the fourth talk in a series entitled Genesis, the first three chapters. In one of the earlier programs, I made the point that God is a communicative God. He's seen conversing with the other persons of the Holy Trinity before the creation of the world. And now, in chapter 1 and verse 3, we get the first commandment. God said, "Let there be light." The response was immediate, and there was light. Now, it'd be pointless to spend time arguing about how you can have issues of light and darkness before the creative act of bringing the sun and moon into being. That is to fail to see the rich poetic nature of the text. So the first commandment is an example par excellence of what theologians call divine fiat. Let me explain what that means. It means effectively that God speaking brings about the very thing he announces, he enunciates. Now, that is an anathema to a naturalist. To a naturalist who sees everything as cause and effect within a closed system, he fails to appreciate that God could act spontaneously into that. So the naturalist is being myopic or short-sighted. Now, God is not obligated to pull rabbits out of hats just to meet my various whims, but he's perfectly capable of doing so. Let there be light, and it was so. I want to tell you three stories from the New Testament which illustrate this perfectly well. They are in fact divine fiat situations which Jesus was involved with. I'll tell you what the three occasions were and the texts they come from, and then explain them. In Matthew chapter 12 and verse 13, we find Jesus saying to a man, "Stretch out your hand." In Mark's Gospel chapter 5 and verse 41, he says to a small girl, a 12-year-old girl, "Little girl, get up." And the third example coming from John's Gospel, in chapter 11, Jesus says to Lazarus, "Come out." Now what's happening in these three occasions? Firstly, Matthew 12 and verse 13. There's a man who, probably since birth, has got a shriveled hand and forearm, and he's seated in the front row of the synagogue. He's probably being placed there by the authorities to see if Jesus would in fact heal him on the Sabbath. It's a trick situation. Jesus has compassion on the man. He looks at him and he says, "Stretch out your hand." Now here's the point. That's the very thing the man could not do. And yet, with the word of command came the ability for it to be fulfilled. And we read, he was completely restored. Mark chapter 5 and verse 41. Jervis, the leader of the local synagogue, had a 12-year-old girl, Jervis, his daughter, and she was sick and she had died. And Jesus was summoned to the house to help. He turned up with three of his disciples, and he went into this little girl's room where she had died, sadly, and he said to her, "Talitha kum," which means, "Little girl, get up." Now that is the very thing she could not do. The girl had died. And immediately she rose. The third example in John's Gospel, chapter 11 and verse 43, Jesus was very good friends with a family consisting of Lazarus, Mary and Martha. They lived at Bethany. And Jesus' very good friend, Lazarus, had died. Again, Jesus had been delayed getting there, but when he arrived, there's a chaotic noise of mourners, both family and friends. And Jesus went along to the tomb where Lazarus had been laid, and he shouted into this tomb, "Lazarus, come out." But that's the very thing Lazarus could not do. He had been dead for a few days. But with the word of command, divine fiat, with the word of command, he was able to fulfill that which he was hitherto not able to do. He came out. He was raised. So back to Genesis chapter 1 and verse 3. Let there be light. Fiat lux. This is the perfect example of divine fiat. And it was. It came about. The word of command enabled that to be fulfilled. Now, God usually establishes predictable laws for the orderly operations of our universe. But even though it might be very exceptional, He's perfectly capable of breaking into this with His divine fiat moments, miraculous and beneficial interventions. Let there be light, declared God, into the formless, empty, dark universe. And there was light. Now, as with all these talks, I'm going to give you something to ponder, reflect upon, and even discuss. So here we go. In Ephesians chapter 3 and verse 20, Paul remarked that God is able to do so much more than we ask or imagine. Now, are we guilty of restricting God's power to the limited possibilities of our own imagination? Think about your prayer life and about the one to whom you pray and then seek to be bolder in prayer. Well, thank you for watching, and look out for the next programme in the series Genesis, the first 3 chapters.